After a successful release of the original Final Fantasy in 1987, Squaresoft began working on a sequel, with really no ideas on what to do for the second installment. Since they didn't really establish any characters in the original, they decided to make a whole new world with a whole new cast of characters and a new story with no direct correlation between the two games. This is something that they would do for nearly every single main entry in the series going forward. The game's development would focus much more on the narrative, unlike the last game. Also, unlike the last game, Final Fantasy II would not be released in the United States until Final Fantasy Origins on the PlayStation 1 in 2003, at least not an official release. They were working on an English release back in 1988 and got as far as the beta and even was published in marketing, but they scrapped it as the SNES would be releasing soon and they would hold off until a game came out on that system instead. Over the years, there would be 15 different releases of Final Fantasy II, and today we're going to look specifically at the PSP version, mainly because it's a lot easier to access than a lot of the other versions. It's also a lot prettier. I also tried to see if there was any differences between each version, and while there is a huge list of differences, nothing really jumps out as a must-have game-breaking thing. It's mostly like a slight tweak here and there, nothing too important. Something I've learned over the research of this game is that people really don't like this game that much. Fans are very harsh, but everyone's experience is different. So let's take a look at Final Fantasy II and see what the second installment has to offer. You start off the game, name your characters, or leave them with the default names, which is what I usually do for these games. The four heroes of the games are named Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon. Unlike the first game, there is no job or class selection screen. Instead, you hit continue, and you see what looks like a peaceful little town gets set absolutely ablaze. It's so bad even the fire is screaming. It sets the stage of an evil empire destroying the rebels' castle, killing all the townfolk, and while your four characters are running away after watching their parents get murdered in front of them, you get thrust into a fight, one you cannot win. Yeah, I should mention from the start that while this game may look pretty cartoony, this game is extremely dark. This is a story riddled with death. After losing, Firion, Maria, and Guy are saved by the Wild Rose Rebellion, with Leon nowhere in sight. The three ask Princess Hilda to join, but she ultimately refuses. Here you learn about a very different mechanic compared to all other Final Fantasy games out there, the password system. Essentially, you can learn a word, bring it up in a conversation later, and get information or advance the story with it. This also applies to items. You learn the password Wild Rose. Yeah, real original there, Wild Rose Rebellion. And you make your way back to Fynn, the place that got destroyed. You find Prince Scott on his deathbed, who tells you of a betrayal by Count Borgon. Sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. Tells the party to find Gordon, gives you a ring to get to the princess, and dies in front of you. You give the ring back to Hilda and you join the rebellion. Easy as that. She gives you a fourth party member named Minwu and sends you to Salamon to find Mithril, an element that is in a lot of Final Fantasy games and for whatever reason claims to be strong in this game, but really isn't at all. The party finds Joseph and Salamon, who won't tell them about anything because his daughter got kidnapped. So you save his daughter, town members, and the thief named Paul, who actually becomes very important and a reoccurring character in the story. You take the mithril back to the rebels, who make weapons and armor with it. You're then set off to Bafisk to stop the building of the Dreadnought, an awesome airship capable of destroying cities, and you fail to destroy it on time. The Dreadnought takes off and destroys countless cities. Luckily, the rebel base is untouched. How lucky is that? So you head back to the base, and Minwu leaves your party because the king, who has had absolutely no input at all in the story, is about to die, and he wants to take care of his final days. Hilda tells the party to go find Sid, who has his own airship, to ask how to destroy the Dreadnought. Sid would be a reoccurring character name going forward in every Final Fantasy game after this, and I believe he is also involved in an airship in every single one, although there are still a few I haven't played, so don't quote me on that. This is where you need to enter Kashan Keep, but the only way to enter is by the voice of a Kashan, the last one being Gordon, who has conveniently disappeared. Or you can get in by using the goddess spell that you have to go find. So you go to Salamon, pick up Joseph for the new fourth party member, go to Snow Cave, which leads to one of the strangest dialogues I've ever seen in any game ever. Guy, speak, beaver. You grab the bell, run into Borgon, defeat Borgon, but with his dying breath throws a boulder down at the party. The party gets saved by Joseph, who sacrificed himself. Without any hesitation, the party heads off to the Kashan Keep, where they find Gordon already in. Imagine that. They grab the soul, which can destroy airships for some reason, and come out just in time to see the Dreadnought with both Sid and Hilda aboard. Turns out they got captured. Now I don't know why Hilda decided to leave her post at the rebel base, but whatever, here we are having to save her. The dreadnought lands to refuel very conveniently to the south of the party. Also near the party is the very first time our feathered friends make an appearance. Now you don't have to do this of course, but if you don't grab a chocobo and ride the dreadnought, then it really doesn't feel like you're playing the game correctly. You hop aboard the dreadnought, save Sid and Hilda, destroy the dreadnought, but not before having a confrontation with the Dark Knight himself. The guy who helped build the dreadnought, but you haven't had any direct altercation with him up until this point. Maria says she sounds familiar, but doesn't think too much about it as the party leaves before the ship is destroyed. The party returns to base just in time for the king to die. With the king dead, Gordon decides to take over the rebels and you head off to Dice to get help from the dragoons. Meanwhile, Minwoo, who no longer has to aid the king, leaves to get the ultimate spell. You randomly pick up a female pirate 4th party member, which is another reoccurring theme in early Final Fantasy games. You get to Dice to learn that all the dragoons are dead and only one wyvern remains. The last wyvern has been poisoned by the Empire however, and then the wyvern gives the party an egg right before it dies, where you drop it off in a cavern to incubate it and hatch it as fast as possible. The party heads back to the base where Hilda wants to talk to Firion in private. A very weird, almost borderline sex scene occurs before Hilda turns into a llama queen. Apparently the real Hilda is being trapped in the Colosseum and is the grand prize for winning. The party switches out the pirate Layla to take control of the forces while Gordon goes away with the party, because leaving your troops with a pirate is always a great idea. At the Colosseum, you killed the behemoth to win, and instead of Hilda, the Empire drops you into the dungeon. It seems all hope is lost when suddenly Paul shows up and unlocks the cell doors. Gordon leaves the party with Hilda, and the main 3 characters distract and defeat the guards. Back at base, the rebels now make a plan to retake Finn, which they do. Once they settle in and realize Minwoo is nowhere around, Hilda sends the 3 to go and find him and grab the Ultima Tomb. You get sent on trials to find rods to open up the path to the Mysidia Tower, just to get eaten by the Leviathan when you actually get near it. Inside the Leviathan's stomach, you discover a little settlement filled with people who also went looking for the Ultima Tomb, and the final living dragoon, Ricard Highwind. Highwind being another reoccurring name in the franchise. You find a ship in the stomach and somehow break out of Leviathan without any explanation at all. The party heads to the tower where Minwoo was apparently waiting for the party to arrive. I don't know how Minwoo got here, the trials weren't complete before he did them, and the Leviathan who protects him just kinda let him by, I suppose. Despite all this, Minwoo breaks the seal with the Ultimate Tomb by killing himself. Not in a bad way, more like a using the life force thing, but whatever. You take the tomb and head back out to the world to find out that literally every town except Finn has been destroyed by the Empire, who are now in charge of a cyclone randomly. Luckily, the wyvern egg just hatched and Paul previously stole a pendant that allows to summon wyverns. With a dragoon leading the way, they jump into the cyclone. In the cyclone, they kill the Emperor and go back to Finn to celebrate. Not everything is as happy as it seems though, because the Dark Knight shows up one more time to reveal himself to be Leon, the guy you named at the very beginning of the game, aka Maria's brother, which I guess we just kind of now figured out. He has now crowned himself the Emperor. So you take Sid's airship, who reluctantly gives you the keys before he dies in Paul's house. Yeah, I don't really know why Sid died here, just kind of dies as die, I guess. The party flies to Palamacia, hopefully I said that right, to confront the now Emperor Leon, just to have the actual Emperor reappear. Apparently he has killed Satan and is now stronger than ever or something. Ricard calls the Wyvern to allow the main characters to escape, where he stays back and sacrifices himself. Yet another death in this game. The party, now back at base, convince Leon to join them, and you finally get your 4th party member just in time for the final dungeon of the game. The Dark Emperor rises Castle Pandemonium. which is essentially the fortress of hell. You go in and go through many different floors before finally facing and killing the Emperor, the final boss of the game. Everyone celebrates. Layla mentions Peg and Firion. Maria is apparently in love with Firion, and Leon just kind of leaves. Now, I was prepared to explain how the story isn't too complicated before saying all of that, but summarizing it really makes you think of how bonkers it truly is. Overall though, I'm pretty happy with the story. It isn't ultra deep like later games are, but way better than anything up to this point. And while it is a little crazy, I'll take crazy over the blandness of Final Fantasy 1 any day. Yes, there is a lot of weird plot holes and a lot of strange decisions, but I'm going to say that it keeps you interested in the game, and it gives you a reason to keep going, which I appreciate. The characters in this game range from pretty cool to kinda lame, and by that I mean the three main characters are incredibly lame. The most interesting characters in this game are the NPCs or the fourth party member, with the exception of Layla, who is just kinda there. Minwu is probably the best character in the game, but Hilda, Sid, Joseph, the history of Ricard really do fill out the world well, and I think that's okay. The main three characters are there to react to situations, not create them, which works really well considering that these three are really just orphan teenagers joining the rebels. And I say three because Leon is not a factor. The world building is by far the best part of Final Fantasy 2 and is what keeps the story going. The sound of this game is great. Every spell has their own graphic and sound effect. The music is just epic and is actually well varied in this game compared to Final Fantasy 1, which is really just a bunch of copy and repeats. Castle Pandemonium was a real standout here. The Chocobo theme was probably the worst in the game, which I hate to say, but this version isn't as long as the other Chocobo songs in future installments. Really, presentation was great all around in this game. The cutscenes were good, the enemies looked good, the bosses are kinda just recolors of enemies, but you can get away with that with something that's from the late 80s. I feel like we were lucky for what we did get for unique boss designs, although I was kinda disappointed with the retextured Emperor skins being a generic enemy. Also, on some versions of this game, including the PSP version, which is a game I played and what you're seeing inside this review, you get an FMV of the opening sequence before you even hit the start screen. Nice touch. Now, we haven't gone over the gameplay, and this appears to be where the game falls apart a bit. I feel like this game was way ahead of its time and ideas, but didn't have the resources to actually fulfill its potential. Really, nothing fulfilled it until about 20 years later, in fact. There's things like the password system where you learn a word or select a word to learn more info about things. But if the character has nothing to say about it at the current moment, you get hit with a question mark instead of any reaction at all. And while even if you don't like that, it doesn't really take away from the experience too much and really just makes you pay attention to the story, the real thing that didn't fulfill the potential was the way you level up, or the class system, whatever the system is called. Remember how I said you didn't choose your class at the beginning of the game? That's because you level up your weapons, your magic, your everything by simply using them. In order to become a master at fire, for example, you must continuously use the fire spell over and over and over again to level it up. And while that sounds like a good system, it means later spells like Ultima don't ever do anything because you're not going to use a level 1 Ultima spell over a level 9 fire spell. On top of this, plenty of the spells like Death and Teleport are just plain broken, and it can essentially kill any boss in the game instantly once it hits a max level. A lot of people state that the best way to get health in this game is to hit yourself over and over again, but I didn't really find this to be the case. I'm not really sure how HP goes up. It would sometimes just randomly go up for me. I don't see anything being different in the PlayStation Portable version versus all the other versions in health, but maybe there is something different. I'm unsure. I do, however, found out the hard way to never dual wield weapons. Instead, have a shield on. You see, having a shield increases your evasion. If your evasion is high enough, you can't get hit at all. And then the health problem doesn't even become a problem because you can't get hit. Basically, I found the level up system fun and rewarding and kind of kept me in the battle the whole time so I could level up my characters. It's not perfect, and I would definitely say there is a wall of experience to hit around level 9, but I had a fantastic time with it, even if it did make the game a little bit easy. I only really had to grind one time in this game, compared to almost every other game in the series where I feel like grinding to be a higher level is necessary. And this is before I realized that using the shield increases evasion. If I knew that ahead of time, I might not need to grind at all. It's also really fun being able to have this much control over your party and what they use. Not the best game in the series for this, but much better than some other ones. In my opinion, the real problem with this game lies in the dungeon design. You see, Final Fantasy 2 was the first game to add a lot of things that the series is known for. Hidden pathways, monsters in a box, even chocobos and Sid. But they decided to make every dungeon in this game have doors that contain an empty room with higher level monsters. Why? Why would this be in the game? They make me not want to explore the dungeons. I don't care if I get everything or not when I'm being punished for doing it. Luckily, this did not carry over to the other games because it borderline ruined the exploration part of this game. Apart from that, the gameplay retains its turn-based style gameplay that made the first game so popular, just has different mechanics inside of it. Well, that's all there is to really say about Final Fantasy II. Now, if you got the Game Boy Advance version or PSP version of this game, you also get a sequel called The Soul of Rebirth. However, we are not going to get into that today, as I didn't play it, and I currently have no plans to go back to Final Fantasy II. Maybe someday in a Pixel remaster, which will be coming out relatively soon at the time of this video, but I don't think Soul of Rebirth is even in it. So, Final Fantasy II is in the books. It has a strong cast of non-playable characters, a divisive gameplay system which I mainly liked, great presentation, and a good enough story to keep us going, and a god-awful dungeon design. So I'm going to give Final Fantasy II a final score of a 7.1 out of 10. It would be closer to an 8 if the dungeon design wasn't so bad. But I'm going to reiterate here that you should do a little more research. Like I said, I love the leveling system, but most people don't, and they just try to exploit it. If you don't enjoy it, then that score is going to be much lower than what I gave it. And that's going to be it for my Final Fantasy II review. Make sure you guys watch my Final Fantasy II playthrough, which finished before this video dropped. Link in the description probably will be below. Hopefully I actually remember to do it, because I feel like a lot of time I don't. Also check out all my other Final Fantasy playthroughs and soon to be reviews, because I eventually want every single Final Fantasy game and review on this channel. I still have a few more to do, but we're getting there. Till then, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching. Like the video if you haven't already, subscribe for more content, comment down below, and check the description for links such as the Discord.